want to make sure that my vote is counted.
If Trump wins, you mean when Trump wins?
Democracy will prevail.
We are not aware of any improper ballots that are being processed.
Every single validly cast ballot is going to be counted.
We will not let the people of Pennsylvania go without having an election observer for every single ballot.
They're doing the best to make sure that every legal vote is counted, and yes, it's a tight race.
It'll probably go through a process, a legal process. As you know, I've claimed certain states, and he's claiming states, and we can both claim the states, but ultimately I have a feeling judges are going to have to rule.
Each ballot must be counted, and that's what we're going to see going through now, and that's how it should be.
From CBS News election headquarters in Times Square, this is a CBS News election update. 2020, America decides. Reporting tonight, Norah O'Donnell.
You're looking live at Times Square in New York as the counting continues across the country. Good evening. I'm Norah O'Donnell here at what has become our home away from home this week. And tonight, the race for the White House is down to the wire, and who will become the next president could soon be decided by thousands of votes. As we come on the air tonight, only 1,900 votes now separate President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden in the state of Georgia. In 4 other states, votes are still being counted, too. In fact, I want to show you live pictures of poll workers in Maricopa County, Arizona, tallying ballots right now. Joe Biden's lead in that state has shrunk to 46,000 votes. Also, Pennsylvania's vote count is changing by the minute, too. The president once led by 600,000 votes. His lead is now around 42,000. Let's take a look at Nevada. Biden leads by about 12,000 votes there. And let's not leave out North Carolina. The president's lead has held steady at about 76,000 votes. At this hour, Joe Biden leads President Trump in the electoral vote, 253 to 213. Now, that is just 17 votes shy of the 270 electoral votes needed to win the election. Earlier tonight, in an extraordinary statement from the White House briefing room, the president said he would win re-election easily if only the legal votes are counted. As we know, all of the votes being counted right now are legal. By contrast, Joe Biden is appealing for calm, again, telling Americans to have patience. There's a lot to get to tonight. We're going to have a lot of analysis, the best team in the business, but I want to go over to Major Garrett first with the latest path to the White House, which is now within striking distance for Joe Biden. Major.
Good evening, Nora. Good evening, everyone. I want to bring everyone's attention to Pennsylvania because what happens in Pennsylvania could be determinative in the next few hours, maybe tonight, sometime tomorrow. And here's why. If Pennsylvania goes to former Vice President Joe Biden, this is a callable race. You can see he goes to 273 if nothing else on this map changes. And I will remind you, as we've gone over the last couple of nights, there is no path to re-election for President Trump that does not include Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is counting votes through the night, as Nora indicated. You can go to the website, Pennsylvania Secretary of State, and watch that process unfold with your very eyes. The trend lines have not been encouraging for President Trump or his supporters. He's been losing ground in Pennsylvania all day, and those votes still being counted predominantly come from the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh region, generally favorable to former Vice President Biden. North Carolina, the president leads there, and that lead has been retained. But we don't expect definitive results from North Carolina until sometime early next week. Georgia, as Nora pointed out, incredibly close. The result there, whether it's for former Vice President Biden or the president, will be a very, very small margin. We are awaiting that probably sometime tomorrow for some clarification. In Nevada, the former vice president's lead continues to hold. The vote outstanding is in the northern part of the state in Washoe County and the southern part of the state, Clark County, generally Democratic strongholds. Arizona, the vice president's lead has narrowed a bit today. We're expecting more updates tonight. One last thing, Nora. In Pennsylvania, the reason the votes are coming in a bit slower is because the Republican legislature there would not allow the early processing of mail-in ballots. If they had, we would have these votes in much earlier.
All right, Major Garrett, thank you. Joined with me tonight, Gayle King, John Dickerson, Nancy Cordes, and Ed O'Keefe. Lots ahead, but first I want to go to Weijia Jiang, who is standing by at the White House to update us on. We saw the president for the first time today in like 2 days, and he made a number of accusations that are not backed up by the facts.
Norah, in his first public remarks since election night, you're right. President Trump made several false statements attacking the integrity of the election, claiming that fraudulent voting would lead to it being stolen from him. There is no evidence of that. Mr. Trump also questioned why all the mail-in ballots seem to be, in his words, one-sided favoring Joe Biden. But remember, he spent several weeks urging his supporters not to vote by mail and to do it in person instead. Mr. Trump also said that all the officials overseeing the ballot counting in battleground states are part of a corrupt Democrat machine, even though the secretaries of state in Georgia and Nevada are Republican. He vowed to fight the results in court, even suggesting that the Supreme Court would intervene.
It's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land. We'll see. But we think there'll be a lot of litigation because we can't have an election stolen like this.
But so far, the Supreme Court has not taken up any election-related cases, and it's unclear that it will. The Trump campaign has filed other lawsuits in key states, but today, judges in Georgia and Michigan tossed two of them out. Still, President Trump is not backing down. CBS News has learned he does not plan to concede, even if Joe Biden declares a victory in the coming days. Norah?
All right, Weijia Zhang, thank you. And as Weijia mentioned, the Trump campaign has filed multiple lawsuits in Pennsylvania trying to stop the counting of votes. The president's lead in the Keystone State, once 600,000 votes, has now dwindled to less than a tenth of that. So joining us now is Pennsylvania's Attorney General, Josh Shapiro. And Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you about that because the Trump campaign filed that lawsuit today asking Philadelphia to stop the counting. Will that happen?
No. Look, there's been a lot of activity, but really no change. The ballots are being counted. Public servants in our communities are doing their best to follow the law and make sure that all these legal votes are counted. Here's the deal on the legal front. The Trump campaign asked for the counting to stop and to allow their poll watchers to get a little bit closer to view the action. And essentially what a judge says was they could move from 10 feet to about 6 feet. In addition to that, they talked about going up to the United States Supreme Court and asked to intervene in a case that on two separate occasions, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to take up. And this is the matter that's already been heard by our state Supreme Court about ballots that were legally cast prior to Election Day and mailed but not received until about 3 days after. And then one of the other big legal issues, literally, Norah, affects not a single voter in Pennsylvania. It was about when you need an identification to come and prove a challenge ballot. Not one voter in Pennsylvania is impacted by that. So I realize there's a lot of chatter, there's a lot of noise, but there's been no legal impact. These ballots are valid, they're lawful, and they're being counted in Pennsylvania.
Josh, I want to also ask you because President Trump said that the states left counting have voting apparatus that is run by Democrats. He's actually wrong because Georgia is run by a Republican. But how can you reassure Americans of the integrity of Pennsylvania's system?
So Democratic or Republican way to count a legal vote. These are clerks and volunteers and people from our community who are doing a public service to open envelopes, to scan ballots, to run them through the computer systems, and to have them counted. That's what's happening here. And I think what we need to do is stop the rhetoric. The campaign is over. We need to follow the law, count the votes, and respect the will of the people here in Pennsylvania and across the country, whatever or whomever they choose.
Mr. Shapiro, Gayle King here. I'm curious about what concerns you most. Hello, what concerns you most this morning when you were with us on CBS this morning? You said your kids were saying, Dad, when are we going to know? When are we going to know? We're also asking, Dad, when are we going to know? When are we going to know? And what concerns you most as you sit here tonight? And do you have any idea when we will know the final count in Pennsylvania?
Gail, I'm not concerned. There's obviously, there's been a ton of litigation on this. In the weeks leading up to the campaign, we battled back and protected the laws of this Commonwealth and protected every eligible vote. We won every single lawsuit. We were prepared on Election Day. We had a smooth Election Day. And now we're having a smooth counting process. And yes, my kids and I guess all other Americans want to know, when's it going to be done? It's taking time. It's slow, but we want to get it right. We want to follow the law. I think the gentleman who set up this segment correctly pointed out that it was the Republicans in the legislature who refused to change the law, just tweak it to allow these county public servants to begin processing these ballots earlier so we could give America the answer that they've been waiting for. In terms of when you're going to get an answer, the Secretary of State has indicated, and I think she's right about this, that by tomorrow, hopefully by early to midday, you're going to have an accurate picture, generally speaking, of where things stand. You want to have all the ballots counted. I think you're going to have a better sense of where things stand in Pennsylvania by tomorrow.
All right. Pennsylvania Attorney Josh Shapiro, thank you much. Thank you very much for joining us, and that news that we may get some of those results tomorrow from the state of Pennsylvania. We should also note that we heard from Joe Biden earlier today. He struck a very different tone when he spoke briefly in Delaware, essentially telling Americans to trust the process.
I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working. The count is being completed, and we'll know very soon.
CBS's Nicole Killian joins us now from Wilmington. And Nicole, what are you hearing from Biden's advisors?
Well, Norah, we're not expecting to see or hear further from the former vice president, at least from this venue tonight. But the main message from the campaign is what you just referenced, to trust the process. And so that's why you heard the former vice president continue to urge patience with the vote count, although he did say that he has no doubt that he and his running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, will prevail. And because they are so close to 270, his campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, said she expected these numbers to fluctuate and to tighten. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what state takes them over the top. As for President Trump's comments earlier this evening, several Biden campaign officials dismissed them, with one aide telling me it's desperate and baseless. Norah?
All right, Nicole Killian, thank you. I want to bring everybody in here. I mean, just as we're sitting here talking, the vote count in some of these states is getting even more narrow. In Georgia, I was just told it's narrowed even further to, I think, like 1,700 votes there. I mean, that was a ruby red Republican state. And now it looks like Joe Biden is gaining ground there.
That's right. It's getting very close in these states. What the president was doing is trying to make that whittling down seem suspicious. It is a part of the normal rhythm of elections. Now, elections aren't this close in so many states, but it's a part of the normal rhythm that happens in an election. To use a sports metaphor, the scoreboard is not the final score. The president is trying to say the fact that the scoreboard might be different than the final score is a problem. That's not the problem. That's the way it works. And let's think about Pennsylvania just very quickly. Philadelphia, the county that's coming in, is such a Democratic district. It hasn't voted for a Republican since 1932. It should be no surprise to anyone that votes coming in from that area would whittle down the president's lead. That's normal. He's trying to make it seem sinister.
Well, it seems as if this could be coming to a conclusion tomorrow.
Senior Biden and I talked to tonight said that they now believe tomorrow morning is when Pennsylvania very likely could end up showing him ahead of the president, and in a way that news organizations that project these things, including CBS, would be comfortable enough to give him the state and therefore give him 270 plus. And it is, a mark of the strategy that they had, that we sit here tonight and he's got a few options on getting to 270 when the president really only has one.
But Gail, you heard the president today. He really seemed to be pushing back against this idea that this has been a legal and fair process.
And I think it's unfortunate because he's leading people to believe, his supporters in particular, that something nefarious is happening here. And we set it up from the very beginning. Right here at this table, all of us said it's going to be a long night, possibly, unless it was a blowout, and very few thought it would be a blowout, that it would take some time, that it may take a couple of days. Now we are here at a couple of days. It's like trying to call the game in the 7th inning, or kids in the car going, are we there yet? Are we there yet? It really is tracking just the way it's supposed to. And the difference that Joe Biden has set compared to what Donald Trump has set is changing people's expectations. Because if you listen, Joe Biden is calling for calm. The process is working. You just heard Josh Shapiro say, the process is working. We just have to let it work.
And by the way, you can watch the process work.
Yes.
I mean, there's all this, exactly. I mean, there's this agitation about poll watchers, but you can look on the screen now. Those are people doing the actual counting, because for a long period of time, The states have set up systems to make sure that these ballots are counted accurately, and it's taking a long time because they're checking twice. They're being very careful about it.
They are volunteers, John. They are regular, your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your brother, your sister. These are regular people doing their civic duty.
Something
Please
to
let's not
celebrate in
forget that.
America, not something to make seem sinister.
Exactly.
But it's interesting, after the president came out this evening and said that there was something sinister going on, the cavalry rushed in to back him up, or the enablers, depending on how you look at it. Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, said a short time ago, Philadelphia elections are crooked as a snake, and there are dead people voting there. And he says he trusts Arizona, but he doesn't trust Philadelphia. He doesn't trust Nevada. Hard to see what the distinction would be because the same process is going on everywhere. Tommy Tuberville, who just won the Senate race in Alabama, he said the election results are out of control and the referees are suddenly adding touchdowns to the other team's side.
But just to be clear, none of them had any evidence of this.
No
this is just
evidence whatsoever.
Excitement of emotion.
But it shows that they're willing to come to the president's defense even when he isn't providing any evidence. Now, I should say there are a lot more Republicans who are coming out and saying that the president is going too far. I mean, you heard from Will Hurd, who's a very well-respected congressman from Texas, saying that what he's doing is dangerous and wrong, and it's undermining the foundation that this nation was built upon. Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, saying there's no defense for the president's comments, undermining the democratic process. And then Adam Kinzinger, congressman from Illinois, who has never been afraid to criticize this president, even though he's a Republican. He said, stop spreading debunked misinformation. This is getting insane.
Nancy, has Mitch McConnell said anything yet, Nancy? Has Mitch McConnell?
And that was my point, is that it's one thing to hear from the green room creatures or the most loyal President Trump supporters. It's another to hear from the rest of the Republican Party. We've yet to hear from those leaders.
Right. What Mitch McConnell said was something much more benign. He said that, all the votes need to be counted. We need to let the process work its way through the system. But he did not criticize.
Well, since we are in the business of facts here at CBS News, I do want to bring in.
We do like facts.
I do want to bring in our CBS News contributor and election law expert, David Becker. And David, I know you have been talking to Secretary of States, scouring all the lawsuits that are out there. Is there any evidence of fraud or illegal balloting at this stage?
Absolutely not. In fact, I think it's safe to say that during this pandemic, we actually had one of the most successful, smooth elections in American history, which is remarkable and a tremendous testament to all of the election officials out there, Republicans and Democrats, who are working to count every vote. I mean, there were some really bizarre statements made in the press conference today by the president, and John, I think, hit the nail on the head. He's trying to make this whittling down of margins seem sinister in places like Pennsylvania and Georgia, where they're counting mail ballots that were absolutely validly cast, that were received by Election Day or before. But at the same time, in Arizona and Nevada, he is relying upon those same mail ballots to whittle down his deficit in those states. So there's a completely incoherent argument here. Observers have been in all of these polling places. In Philadelphia, dozens of Republican observers. Detroit, this has been one of the most transparent elections ever. And I think one of the things that's most interesting about all of this is that we have to remember that if we look at the election as a whole, it's not just the presidential race. There were state legislative races, House races, Senate races, and Republicans did very well in those races. They held the Senate. They gained in the U.S. House of Representatives. They did very well in state legislative races. And really, by questioning the integrity of this election overall, he's hurting his whole party, not just the United States.
That's an interesting point because his party did very well in many other instances. And in fact, Trump did a good job at turning out his supporters. It's just that Joe Biden may have done a better job in some of these key places. On that point, David, how would you describe the president's current legal strategy?
I think incoherent at best. Again, I mean, he's relying on the one hand on mail ballots to get him over the hump in Nevada and Arizona while he's railing against them in Georgia and Pennsylvania. And all of them are being processed in very similar ways. They're completely valid. It's a transparent process. For instance, in Pennsylvania, while they're complaining about the ballots that are coming in late, those numbers of ballots are actually very small. The ballots that are all being reported right now all were received on Election Day or earlier. The ballots that were received after Election Day have been segregated, and they have not been reported out yet. So it may actually be the case, and we've talked about this before, that he might be behind after all of the valid ballots are cast, and the ballots he's arguing to be kept out, he would actually need to have even the slightest chance of regaining the lead in Pennsylvania.
Really interesting, David Becker. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And when we come back, we're going to check in with correspondents in two of the states we're still waiting to call, Arizona and Georgia. And that margin in Georgia just keeps getting slimmer and slimmer. We'll have an update for you. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides. And want to take you inside. These are actually live pictures in Maricopa County, Arizona, where they are still counting the votes tonight. And election officials in several states, including Arizona, are concerned about the safety of those election workers amid a wave of threats and angry protests outside their doors. With nearly 90% of the votes counted, Joe Biden is holding on to a narrow lead in Arizona. CBS's Jamie Yuccas joins us now from Phoenix. And good evening, Jamie.
Good evening, Nora. We're told those ballot workers are supposed to be leaving to go home shortly, and then we will see some of those ballots show up overnight, will be secured, and then released tomorrow morning. I want to show you, though, what's going on behind me. Those workers last night had to be escorted to their cars by police in riot gear. So they put up fencing today to subdue the crowd a little bit. But what's happening right now, there's about 150 of President Trump's supporters who are here, and you can see they're all pushing their way now towards the building. It turns out that Alex Jones, radio host and conspiracy theorist, has shown up here. And through much of the night, it's been very subdued. But when he came in, they started chanting USA, running towards him. We're not sure if he's going to be speaking shortly or not. But I can tell you that that some of the crowd is armed. And like last night, we saw about a third of the crowd armed. I just want to tell you that they said, we are harmless, and we're just here to defend the Second Amendment. Nora?
And Jamie, just quickly, how many votes are still outstanding, do we believe, in Arizona, and when might we get a full count?
Well, the Secretary of State really was clear today that it probably won't be until tomorrow night that we'll see a full count. We still have about 200,000 ballots left to be counted just here in Maricopa County. We have a little bit more than 300,000 still left to be counted statewide. So that 200,000 of those ballots that need to be counted, we only saw about 71,000 processed today. So we might have tomorrow or longer to go.
All right, Jamie Yuccas there. Thank you. Let's go now to Georgia, where President Trump's lead has been shrinking all day and into the night. The race has tightened dramatically as early votes have been counted in counties that tend to vote Democratic. At stake, Georgia's 16 electoral votes. CBS's Mark Strassman is in Atlanta, where the vote count is also continuing late at night. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Nora. In this battleground state, the drumbeat for the president has now gone from worrisome to alarming. His lead, more than 100,000 votes yesterday, is now under 1,800, and the bleeding can't be stopped. The issue is these absentee ballots. More than a dozen counties have been counting them all day long, and it seems as though every time the state's vote totals go up, the president's lead goes down. And think about this. Depending when different counties update their totals and send them to the state over the next couple of hours, the president could easily wake up in the morning to discover he now trails in Georgia. There are roughly 18,000 ballots still to be accounted for, all absentee ballots here that we're talking about. And no question again, Nora, this has been a punishing day for the Trump campaign in Georgia.
Wow, Mark Strassman, it's incredible to just see that race just essentially tied even, 49.
It's tied during our broadcast.
Yeah,
it just came down to
a
complete tie.
Right. You'd have to give a shout out to Stacey Abrams for that, for the voters she mobilized. I think about Fulton County, that's Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who had that very emotional news conference in the middle of the rioting there. She said, listen, a protest needs to have a purpose. If you care about what's happening, then you need to register to vote. Killer Mike, who's a very popular rapper activist. I wrote this down because I liked it so much when he said, what you need to do is plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. There's an elected official you don't like, go to the voting booth and vote them out. And I think that's clearly what's happened in a ruby red state. They're certainly trying to do that today in Georgia.
Well, and we're going to be watching to see how well they mobilize, because we're looking at the prospect now of not just one, but two Senate runoffs in Georgia 2 months from now, because just today, as the president's lead was ticking down in Georgia, so was David Perdue's. He's the Republican incumbent. He has now come down below 50%. That is the cutoff, the threshold for avoiding a runoff. He's at 49.9 at this point. And so if that stays, then his race is going to
two runoffs in Georgia.
The reason it's unclear, we don't know who will control the United States Senate in the next term. Want to bring in Major Garrett because he's going inside the numbers about just what's happening in Georgia.
Right. And about Georgia, Mark Strassman talked about those absentee ballots and how they've been moving against President Trump. It's worth pointing out the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia encouraged Republican and Democratic voters in that state to use absentee ballots. So we should keep that in mind as well. Two component parts, Norah and team, of the Georgia electorate. Let's start with black voters in this election. Joe Biden carried them 87-11. That's roughly the same as Hillary Clinton did in 2016. And the composition of the Georgia vote, very similar in both 2016 and 2020. Let's go to white voters in Georgia with college degrees. President Trump carried them 56-42. There's an interesting comparison to the 2016 cycle. Look at that. President Trump carried them 69-28. That is a net 18-point swing among white voters in Georgia with a college degree, 2016 to 2020.
Really interesting, Major Garrett. So not only was Joe Biden able to continue to perform with black voters and minority voters in Georgia, he also grew the share of the suburban vote in order to make it so close in Georgia.
Right. Reached into President Trump's turf, basically. Yeah, which is what you want to do.
And it's a strategy he tried in so many states, including North Carolina and Florida, where he trails. And it may have worked, but just barely in Georgia.
You know, what's interesting is we've looked at that electoral map, though, that pathway for the former Vice President Joe Biden to win the White House. Georgia really isn't necessary. It would be kind of an extra.
Nice to have, not a need to
But
have.
what a message it would send, though, Norah. What a message it would send if Georgia, who is ruby red, before this process is over, turns, you know, a shade of blue.
Right.
That would send a very powerful message about what is happening in this country.
And it also sends a message about the validity of the vote, because Georgia has a very conservative Secretary of State. And so if you're seeing the same thing happen in Georgia that you're seeing in democratically controlled states like Pennsylvania, it's hard to argue that somehow there's something sinister going on here.
And about Republican Governor Brian Kemp, too. I mean, the message that would send.
It also matters if Georgia comes in early in this narrative. It matters because you want to be the candidate who gets to say, I've gotten to 270. And if Vice President Biden got to Georgia, the only possible thing the president could do would then be to tie him if he won all the other states. So it matters to win in terms of momentum early.
I have one more question for Major because he's got some interesting numbers about this, about how voters feel about the future.
Right. We've already begun to see a little bit of anxiety. Tension is probably not too strong a word about the atmosphere around this election. So in preparation for that, the exit poll surveyors asked a question of Biden and Trump supporters. If Biden wins, this was to Trump supporters, how would you feel? 46% concerned, 45% scared. I don't need to tell you, that's 91% in the concerned or scared category. Same question put to Biden voters. How would you feel as a Biden voter if Trump wins? 27%, 59%. Not as much, but definitely in that range. Both camps, concerned, scared, anxiety runs deep, which is something we're going to have to deal with whenever this race is called and whomever is the next president of the United States, or if the current president is reelected. We're going to have to deal with this reality.
It seems like Joe Biden may have an idea that exists because he keeps on talking about wanting to unite the country and that he would be the president, not of red states or blue states, but of the United States of America.
And Major, last time I checked, scared in any form is never a good thing.
Not at all.
Never a good thing.
All right, coming up next, we'll head to Las Vegas and speak with Attorney General Aaron Ford. That's coming up next. By our projections, Joe Biden is 17 electoral votes away from winning the presidency. He can get those votes if he wins Arizona and Nevada. Tonight, Biden leads in Nevada by just a slim margin as they are counting the votes there. We want to bring in Aaron Ford. He is Nevada's Attorney General. And Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for joining us. We saw a number of the president's supporters, Republican officials in your state today saying they want to file a lawsuit, that they have evidence that thousands of people from out of the state voted there. Is there any merit to that claim?
Well, if there's any merit to the claim, it's not showing in a lawsuit, because the lawsuit to this point is non-existent. They were talking about it at 8:30, but we've not been filed. It's not been filed and it's not been served. We did.
All right, Mr. Attorney General is telling us that, I know we're having some technical issues, but he says there's not been a lawsuit filed on that claim that was made today by Rick Grinnell, who's the former Director of National Intelligence, that they had some proof that people from out of the state had voted there. What's at stake in Nevada, that state? I mean,
6 electoral votes, but what's at stake in this claim is, like all of them, which is, Major was just talking about those feelings, people's feelings about the country. As this gets fought, those people are going to get more emotional. They're going to, and then we got to run off in Georgia maybe with 2 Senate races where it's going to get more emotional. A country that was already emotional and on edge is having a bunch of events happen in which people are claiming the most nefarious, well, people on the Trump side are claiming the most nefarious behavior. It's just ratcheting up the emotional.
John, I have friends telling me that, sorry, Norah, but I have friends telling me, to follow up on your point, my anxieties have anxieties. My new best friend is Xanax. I mean, these are really smart, very cool, calm, collected people that people are really, freaked out by what is happening. People are already nervous on Election Day.
Right.
But, had the right tone been set. So just imagine if the president had said, everybody, listen, let's let the process work. Everybody stay calm. We want all the votes counted the way that Joe Biden is doing. It would have sent such a different message and would have really calmed down his supporters as well.
Well, that's why I thought it was important to hear from the Attorney General, despite that, is because there are allegations of fraud. There's a lack of evidence. There are allegations and sometimes in threats of lawsuits that haven't been filed, et cetera. Let's bring in Anthony Salvanto, because he can dig down into those states that we are watching tonight, that we are waiting for more voter information.
Indeed. Let me start in Nevada and just show you. Now, the whole key to Nevada is Clark County. That's Las Vegas. In there, think around 100,000 ballots still to come. We get word that we will get more reporting from them tomorrow, so we're standing by for that, okay? And of course, in the state generally, we've had to break out the decimal points here, right? 49.4 for Joe Biden, 48.5 for President Trump. That is just how tight this is. I want to stay in the Southwest for a second, Norah, because let me give you an update out of Arizona, and specifically out of Maricopa. Now, they've been reporting ballots through the day. And look, in contrast to what we have seen on the East Coast, in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, where the ballots coming in have been trending the state toward Joe Biden, in Maricopa, very slightly, they've been edging towards the president. We got a report earlier today, which was 53% Biden. Then we got one that was 52% Biden. Then we got one that was 51% Biden. And that's been the pattern. And that's why that race is getting tighter and tighter. And then I'll take you back again to Pennsylvania, because that one is really interesting. Here, you're going to watch. I mean, these numbers might actually update live while I'm talking to you. Again, we're talking decimal point changes here. And as they just did, 3,243 for Biden, 3,280 for the president. So Joe Biden gaining in real time as they count ballots, predominantly out of Philadelphia, which is, of course, a rich Democratic vote area. And that is helping propel him maybe a little bit closer.
So now we're down to less than 40,000 votes in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And isn't the challenge with projecting a state that is this close, Anthony, is the fact that, you can build all kinds of models about how many people you expect will vote, but at the end of the day, you don't really know. It could be a few thousand votes off here or there. You could have a surge of mail-in votes right at the end. And so it's very hard to predict exactly how many people are going to vote.
That's exactly right. Look, on some level, it gets even simpler. It's just straight math. There's this much of a lead and this many ballots. Can one candidate make up the margin? But what gets really complicated is finding out from all these elections officials just how many ballots are left. How many provisional ballots? How many have you counted? How many are left to count that are sitting there? And so that just involves going around and figuring that out county by county. You know, it's a really good lesson for everybody that although we elect a national office as a president, what we do is we vote and we count at the local level. It is your local officials and volunteers who are actually going through all of this.
And that's why we'll get more of an update tomorrow. Anthony Salvanto, thank you. All right, when we come back, we'll get you up to date on the race for control of the U.S. Senate. Some changes tonight to update you on. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides. Welcome back to CBS News Election Headquarters. It's not just the presidency that lies in the balance tonight. It's control of the U.S. Senate. Nancy Cordes is following those key races. And Nancy, I'd have to tell you, the stock market likes what it thinks is going to happen.
It does like it, and here's why. First of all, they like the idea of a President Biden because he's more steady, more predictable than President Trump. He's not going to start a trade war with China. But what they also like is the heightened prospect of Republicans maintaining control of the Senate, because that means that a President Biden wouldn't be able to hike taxes, for example. He wouldn't be able to pass legislation that would enable the government to negotiate drug prices. And so this is kind of the dream scenario.
So what are the races that are still to be decided?
So right now, we've got 47 Democrats, 48 Republicans, with 5 races still to be called. So let's go through those right now. First of all, Arizona, where Mark Kelly has about a 3.5-point lead over the Republican incumbent Martha McSally. That's a larger lead than Vice President Biden has over President Trump. Hard to see how she could make that up, but we're not calling the presidential race in Arizona, and we want to be cautious about that, too. Over to North Carolina, where these numbers really haven't changed over the past 24 hours. Tom Tillis has a 2% lead over Cal Cunningham. The Democrats said that's a tough pickup for Democrats at this point. It could happen, though. It's possible. That's why we haven't projected that race. Now let's go to Georgia, where I was mentioning to you a little earlier that you can see that David Perdue is now sitting there at 49.9%. So he has a lead over the Democrat, Jon Ossoff, but because he has fallen below 50%, if that holds, this race is going to a runoff in January, along with the other Georgia race that we know is going to a runoff, Kelly Loeffler against Raphael Warnock. And then finally, the last race that hasn't been called, guys, Alaska, because only about 56% of the vote is in. They won't start counting the rest, which is pretty much all absentee by mail ballots, until next Tuesday.
That's a huge difference, though, Nancy.
It is a huge difference, and it seems like that would be very difficult to make up, but keep in mind that the Democrat, Al Gross, just like a lot of Democrats, urged a lot of his supporters to vote by mail, so he probably will get a larger share of those absentee ballots. And so while Alaska is a Republican-leaning state, we haven't called that one out.
Can you imagine being Senator Perdue and you're at 49.9%?
No.
Just that 0.1%?
Can you imagine being a poor citizen of the state of Georgia whose television is about to melt if there are 2 Senate races that are going to determine control of the Senate?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to see who that benefits, a runoff. Normally, you know, when there's a runoff, it's a lower turnout election. But you could have Democrats feeling like, okay, our entire agenda is on the line here. We need to win control of the Senate. Or you could have Republican voters who feel like this is their one chance to block Vice President Biden.
But another reason why this is so incredibly important for those that were voting about the issue of judges, whether it was the Supreme Court or other federal judges, if Joe Biden were to become the next president of the United States, there's a Republican Senate. Could he put the judge that he wants for the next U.S. Supreme Court vacancy? That's why it becomes such a big fight.
Mitch McConnell could slow that process down tremendously. That's exactly what he did when Republicans took control of the Senate in 2014 to President Obama. And that's why, once President Trump took office, they had all these judgeship openings that they were able to.
Democrats still remember that, too.
There could be a lot of voters in the state who like the idea that maybe one of those races they vote for the Democrat, and then the other one they vote for the Republican. They get a little bit of column A, column B.
But Jon Ossoff's got to be feeling pretty good. I remember that debate where it didn't go well for Mr. Perdue so badly that he said, "Nah, that's okay. One and done's all right. We don't need to meet again."
It's pretty pretty amazing, and
Yeah.
it's tight. By the way, that special election, also very close. When you add up all the Republicans in that special election, add up all the Democrats, it was only a 1.5% difference.
Really interesting.
Has
All right,
anything
coming up next.
Other than that,
how the Latino vote shaped the race in Arizona and other states. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides. And welcome back to CBS News Election Headquarters. We want to bring in CBS News contributor Maria Elena Salinas with new insight into how Latinos impacted the vote in Arizona. And that's Gail checking her phone, but sorry, Maria Elena. We want to know about Latinos.
Okay. Well, Norah and Gail, if Biden can turn Arizona blue, it's due in large part to a 10-year-long on-the-ground effort to register Latino voters that was jump-started by the passage of SB 1070 a decade ago. Now, that was a harshly anti-immigrant law, and it was known as a Show Me Your Papers law. In 2016, mobilized Latinos were behind the ousting of infamous Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Remember him? He was indicted for refusing to stop racial profiling, although he was later pardoned by President Trump. This year, they could flip the state. We're looking at a more than 85% increase in Latino turnout this cycle compared to when that law was passed. And according to Latino Decisions, Latinos provided Biden with a net margin of 270,000 votes in Arizona. That margin is almost as large as the total Latino vote back in 2008. Whoa. And if you couple that with President Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric and his policies, and you have a strong Latino turnout at nearly 2-to-1 margin for Vice President Biden, and it could push him over the top. But I know we're still counting votes. That's the important thing. But the bottom line is that Latinos are showing up and making a difference in Arizona and elsewhere.
Wow, and suggest that they could have been decisive, especially if it's going to be that very narrow margin.
And the belief is if you can do it in Arizona, eventually you can do it in Texas, potentially. You can do it in other states. And with growing populations in mid-Atlantic states like Pennsylvania, one day they could be even bigger factors. So it's a very hopeful sign for those who've spent years mobilizing Latino voters.
Right, and as Maria Elena has reminded us too, and many others, the Latino vote is not monolithic.
Not at all.
Yes.
Nor is the black vote or the white vote. It is different, and certainly in different states, people vote on different issues.
And I talked to some young Latinos who were canvassing in Arizona, and they remembered Sheriff Joe and what it was like to grow up under him. And so it wasn't about Donald Trump. It was about a whole worldview they were trying to get people to vote against.
Well said. Thank you. All right, we'll be back in just a moment with closing thoughts. This is CBS News 2020, America Decides. A historic election with turnout at record highs. Ed?
You know, 15,823. Remember that number? That is how much the race is tightened just this hour in Pennsylvania by 15,823 votes. Joe Biden now down just 26,000 votes behind the president.
Wow.
42,000 and change at the beginning of the hour.
We may wake up in the morning with Pennsylvania, a new leader in the state of Pennsylvania.
Nora, we may go to sleep tonight with a new leader. That pace it's going.
I'm planning on going to bed soon, so I don't know if that counts. I don't know what you're doing later tonight, John. But
We're up here at 11. I'll be in bed at 11:07.
That's right.
How long it'll take me to get home.
That's right, because we're going to be watching Gail bright and early tomorrow on CBS This Morning. Thanks to everybody here for joining us. And our election coverage continues with your local news on this CBS station. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, join Gail for CBS This Morning. I'll be back. Yes. Well, you're going to have a lot of news tomorrow morning.
I think so, too.
There's going to be a lot of results tomorrow morning.
I'm looking forward to it. This never gets old.
Never gets old. All right, and I'll be back tomorrow during the day with any developments in the election on the CBS Evening News. For all of us, John Dickerson, Gail King, Ed O'Keefe, and Nancy Cordes, I'm Norah O'Donnell at CBS News Election Headquarters, our home away from home. This is a CBS News special report. Thanks so much for watching.